sense. I'd like to move the conversation on a little bit now and talk about how space is managed in those commas. There's a very clear public perception that it's all Bezos and the man in his car is a Tesla, etc., dominating the space sector. But there's still obviously a very significant governmental funding aspect to and control. What are your takes on that particular relationship, and do you have any experiences you'd like to share with us, Jamie?
Is the question there, Bruce? What my impression is of the interplay between industry and government in terms of funding, or?
Well, that's a very good. Well, funding is one aspect. I mean, I suppose the question is, what experiences do you have of the government and the private sector managing space? That's the first part of the conversation here.
Okay. Well, I can kind of draw on what we just talked about there, where there's a communication issue around space for sure. Because I think a lot of the people in space would understand that, yeah, space helps Earth. But take, he was former Lord Mayor of London, Michael Mianelli. So I think it was the office before the current one. And he was an incredible advocate for space. He's got some really good technical chops on him himself. And he's just an absolute polymath across a great range of sectors. He was running weekly coffee colloquia and town hall meetings, just getting the word out in City of London and wider region, essentially, to what space was presenting as an opportunity. 40% of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals are directly enabled by space technologies. This is stuff like interconnectivity, Earth observation are probably your main players in that. But there's rightly concerns around that, because with Earth observation, this exact same technology stream for that directly supports and enables surveillance capitalism. And most people should be concerned about that. That is the thing that people should be worried about. But it's like, potentially there's a push here where you're trying not to rile people up about the negative aspects of it. So you aren't even talking about the concept at all and how it enables the good, so that people aren't asking essentially, hey, why are all these technologies going up there? Why can I be observed and tracked to this insane degree? So Sarah, you spoke about how in the olden days you had moon landings, and people are still kind of hung up on those. And that's pretty true, but I'd say it was probably more politicized space back then, right? It was, I mean, you had the space race. You kind of don't have that right now. I mean, it's not a solved problem by any means, but there's not that sort of national drive or unity or even impetus towards expansion into space that there has been in the past, which absolutely baffles me, because it's the only expansion vector I can think of that isn't directly colonial, as in trying to take someone else's lands functionally. It is establishment of new territories. That should be pride of place around any nation's agenda if they're seeking to expand their own capabilities in a moral way for the future. Yet that's just swept under the rug, and we're just talking about data. You guys who've spent some time in Edinburgh will know the Fringe show. It's one of the largest world's arts festivals. I caught just one program this year, and it started with two people writhing on the floor of a basement. And I was like, oh, that's actually pretty standard for the Fringe. It could be really good. It could be really bad. Turned out I thought it was really good. So the kind of thing of this, the conceit of this Fringe show was you have somebody who's invented a way to predict the weather. And it involves some insane technology. He's just got 12 leeches in different test tubes in a bird cage, and they somehow convey what the weather is going to be like in the next week or two. And he spends the rest of the show explaining to the audience this fictional device. And he's reading his findings from a piece of paper. And at some point, the sprinklers come on, and all the ink is running off the paper. The paper's tearing apart in his hands, and this guy who's like being cast as a scientist is still reading from this piece of paper, completely oblivious and completely unable to actually solve the climate problem that is now drowning his work. It's like, you're generating all this data, you're getting all these insights, and you forgot systemically how to use them. I think people need to bring space back into this systemic ability to be wielded whether it's for national inspiration, whether it's for guiding just the trajectory of humankind. And I think we kind of lost that somewhere along the way.
If I could add a bit there, though, Jamie, I will say as well, it's something that, and I think this ties well with the side of the World Space Week. I think we're actually just seeing more of a shift away from the West when it comes down to the space, and where a lot of the more emerging technologies and really that push is coming from the East now. We saw India being able to land, on the South Pole, and we're seeing, more and more China with their data centers in space, really pushing the capability of what is possible. Because I think a lot of these nations, who were once overshadowed, now they're really taking front stage and really showcasing what can be done. China has always had their own space station, and India wants to have their own one as well pretty soon. We're seeing the rest of the Asia Pacific region equally want to have their own developments. They want to go to the moon. They want to beat the West in it. But I think, have we really taken up that competition? Or are we still, a bit in our high horse of we've done it already, we don't need to worry, we'll always be kings and queens? Like, I think there's a bit more to that story, really. And I think it's nice to see, the globalization of the space race in a way. But are we really up for the challenge anymore? I guess those are some interesting follow-ups there.
Yeah, and I think when we go back to that whole space race, which effectively was an extension of the Cold War in zero gravity, effectively. Here we are now, and it's becoming. I hesitate to say, but it's going more towards like a Weyland-Yutani type situation, where if we could jump forward 100 years from now, there will be large corporate conglomerates running space, and governments will be not paying lip service, but will be on the periphery of that. Gosh, that conversation went off in a completely different direction there, Jamie. Thank you very, very much. But Mason, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing that I think is stopping us from getting there right now is pretty much for primes to be successful and stay on that growth trajectory. They have large government contracts. And so these companies might be leading, but like if you take out the NASA funding for the new space stations, I don't think a single commercial space station will fly in the next 10 years. I mean, you're looking at the various companies that are trying to put space stations up, and they're all bidding for those lucrative contracts and those kind of things. So it's going to be an interesting one that until companies like SpaceX actually start putting a lot more of their own capital behind it, as opposed to US government funding behind it, will it be sustainable? Will it grow? That being said, on the backside of the funding is this new space is allowing us smaller SMEs to actually start thriving, because we are agile enough that we can tap into some funding that's not direct government ties, but we still rely some on primes for success, at least in the current model, because the cost of launch still requires such high sums. So again, we gotta be careful if we get to that 5 or 6 corporations that run the world type of model, like Weyland-Yutani's, versus how much is still being propped up by government spending, whether it's direct government spending like the Artemis program, or it's indirect like through Starship or Blue Origin or something like that.